today, and thank you all for joining from online, from wherever you are. We are very pleased to have Venerable Gyalten Lekden with us today, who's going to be leading us on teachings on Acharya Dharma Rakshita's Wheel of Sharp Weapons. This is the 11th session that we are having with Venerable. This is a very important text on Lojong and mind training, which something we all need. So we are very happy to have Venerable with us. Thank you so much, Venerable.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, for being here. Those of us who are online. I think they may have told you those online that were without power. That's why I look like I'm telling a ghost story with this light behind me. I apologize. During COVID, at first, when COVID, there was a lockdown at Sarah, they stopped debate, which we know was the right thing to do. And so instead of debate, we call lap lap, which is like, how do you say it? Lap lap is just like advice. So all of our class would get together and we just discuss whatever topics, we'd go through a couple pages of our textbook every day. And at first we did it all on Zoom because there was full lockdown. Then the second half of COVID, they decided that we could meet with our classmates because that was safe somehow, it doesn't make any sense because when you meet with your classmates, everyone lives in different houses. It all gets mixed together. But that's what they decided. So we'd go meet with our classmates to do lap lap, to go through our text for a couple hours. But quite often the power was very unstable at that time. So we'd meet in a room, the size of this gompa maybe. We'd meet in like different gompas, there are different kanzens. And often we'd be in pitch darkness and we'd all just have like our mobile phones out trying to read by our mobile phones so we could do lap lap by mobile phone. So this is a little bit reminding me of COVID times a little. I don't know. Maybe it's still PTSD. I don't know. Just joking. It's good to have obstacles when you're trying to study Dharma, because it gives you more practice, more opportunity to practice. And of all the obstacles we can have, this isn't the biggest one. So, we should be happy to have small obstacles like this. Some better chance for merit. So with that, let's just take a moment to create a sacred space, a quiet and intentional space. Whatever worldly activities we've been doing today, whatever running around we've been doing, however busy our lives have been, let's put that to the side and allow ourselves to be focused and intentional with our time together here. Set the strong motivation that we're coming together here to study the teachings of the Buddha, not merely for our own benefit alone, but so that we might be of maximum benefit to others. We recognize that the way to make our life meaningful is to be of service to others, to work for the happiness and well-being of others. And we recognize that the best way to do that is to improve our minds, improve our lives, develop our own wisdom and compassion to such a degree that we are of utmost benefit, which means becoming a Buddha ourselves. So we're going to be studying these precious mind training teachings with the immediate intent to improve our minds and our relationship to the nature of reality, to help subdue our egos, our self-cherishing minds, to find happiness, bliss, and contentment in this life, with the long-term goal of that propelling us along the path to enlightenment so that we might become Buddhas to benefit all sentient beings. So set a strong motivation in this way. And so we will offer some preliminary prayers to begin our session today. So those that have the gold prayer book, I'm sorry if I'm not online, so I can't share my screen. But for those of the gold prayer book, we're going to start on page 34, which is Refuge in Bodhicitta. Oh, there you go. Thank you. We will offer this 3 times in Tibetan and then once in English, and then we'll continue on with the next prayers in English. Sangye Chiran Soki Chonam La Jancho Paru Dagni Kapsu Shi Dagi Jinsogi Pesonam Gi Jola Pincher Sangye Ju Parsho Sangye Chiran Soki Chonam La Jancho Paru Dagni Kapsu Shi Dagi Jinsogi Pesonam Gi Jola Pincher Sangye Ju Parsho Sangye Chiran Soki Chonam La Jancho Bardo Dagni Kapsu Chi Dagi Jinsogi Personam Drola Penche Sange Dro. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and the other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Reverently I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time, and rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain unto the end of cyclic existence and turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of all others to the great enlightenment. Now, the mandala offering we'll offer twice, once in Tibetan and once in English. And so, for the mandala offering, what we'll be doing is visualizing the entire universe that exists. And once we have a visualization of it, we purify it. So it is a perfectly pure Buddha realm, free from all stain and all fault, all displeasure, discomfort. And once it's become purified in that way, we offer it to all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas for the purpose of benefiting all sentient beings. And we offer mandala at the beginning of the teaching, so we can, on the student's part, to request the teaching from the teacher, and also to request all the blessings of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. This ground anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the four continents, the sun, and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and I offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Hiram Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niryataya. And so we'll continue with praise to Shakyamuni Buddha, which is on page 73 of our prayer book. I've mentioned it before, but this prayer, Shakyamuni Buddha, very common in the monastery. The first half of it, at least, you see amended to many other prayers. You see this, the first half, before the part where we actually do the prostrations to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, the second part. This first part, many prayers begin with this because it's so important to list off all these different qualities of the Buddha and to begin whatever Dharma session you're doing by recognizing and praising Shakyamuni Buddha as the founder, right? And bringing us closer to the teachings that we're about to study. So it's a very powerful prayer to include. And so today, what I've been trying to do with our sessions is we begin our sessions with prayers that evoke both the method, which is compassion and bodhicitta, and then also wisdom. So we'll offer this praise to Shakyamuni Buddha, which is celebrating Shakyamuni Buddha and offering prostrations to the Triple Gem. And then we'll offer the Heart Sutra as well, which is the wisdom aspect of the Buddhist teachings. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme God of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme God of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakti clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, to the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme God of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakti clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. When, O supreme amongst humans, you were born on this earth, you paced out 7 strides and then said, I am supreme in this world. To you who are wise, then, I prostrate. With pure bodies, form supremely pure, wisdom ocean like a golden mountain, fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner of the best, Lord, to you I prostrate. With the supreme signs, face like spotless moon, color like gold, to you I prostrate. Dust free like you, the 3 worlds are not. Incomparably wise one, to you I prostrate. The Savior having great compassion, the Founder having all understanding, the field of merit with qualities like a vast ocean. To you, the one gone to thusness, I prostrate. The purity that frees one from attachment, the virtue that frees one from the lower realms, the one path, the sublime pure reality, to the Dharma that pacifies, I prostrate. Those who are liberated and who also show the path to liberation, the holy field qualified with realizations, who are devoted to the moral precepts, to you, the sublime community intending virtue, I prostrate. Homage to the Supreme Buddha, homage to the Dharma refuge, homage to the great Sangha, to all 3 ever devout homage, to all worthy of respect, bowed with bodies as many as all realms atoms in all aspects. With supreme faith I pay homage. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions. Perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a visual aberration, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew or a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud, see, condition things as such. Through these merits may sentient beings attain the rank of all seas, subdue the foe of faults, and be delivered from samsara's ocean, perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. And continue. I prostrate to the Arya triple gem. Thus did I hear at one time. The Bhagawan was dwelling on massive Vulture's mountain in Rajagriha, together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagawan was absorbed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya, Avalokiteshvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those 5 aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then, through the power of Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya, Avalokiteshvara. How should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya, Avalokiteshvara said this to the Venerable Sharadvatiputra. Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding these 5 aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty, emptiness is form, emptiness is not other than form, form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness, there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomena. There is no I element, and so on, up to and including no mind element, and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on, up to and including no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the endpoint of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly, completely awakened to the unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance upon the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as truth since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is proclaimed. Tayata om gate gate paragate parasamgate bodhi swaha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara, saying, well said, son of a lineage. It is like that. It is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom just as you have indicated, even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagavan, having thus spoken, the Venerable Sharadvati Putra, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya, Avalokiteshvara, and those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised that which had been spoken by the Bhagavan. I prostrate to the gathering of dakinis in the three chakras who abide in the holy yoga of using space. By your powers of clairvoyance and magical emanations, look after practitioners like a mother her child. Akasamarta Chadara Samaraya Pe Akasamarta Chadara Samaya Pe Akasamarata Chadara Samaraya Pe Tayata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgate Bodhi Swaha. By the teachings of the three supreme jewels possessing the power of truth, may the inner and outer hindrances be transformed, may they be dispelled, may they be pacified. Shintam Kuriye Swaha. May all negative forces opposed to the Dharma be completely pacified. May the host of 80,000 obstacles be pacified. May we be separated from the problems and harmful conditions to Dharma. May all enjoyments be in accord with the Dharma. And may there be auspiciousness and perfect happiness here, right now. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Hmm. Oh, okay. So, yeah, we're online here. Sorry, everyone. We're dealing with some technical difficulties. I'll let you worry about that, okay? No.
I just got a message from Descom. It's not coming before 11. How helpful. Okay. I mean, I hope it does, but it says this. The emergency light charged. We need it.
Okay. Well, we do the best we can do, yeah? As we sit here with dealing with technical difficulties, this is a very 21st century problem to Dharma experience, Imagine you're at a teaching even 60, 70 years ago in Tibet. There's no sound system. There's a few hundred people. You're just lucky if you can hear what the teacher's saying. Most of the people there are only there to get blessings because they can't really hear what's going on. Only the monks that are sitting in the very front can hear. So we at least have some, these obstacles are very small compared to that. We have such great access to the Dharma. So it's good to, every once in a while, remember that obstacles are okay. With that, let's think about to be good students, what it means for us to be practitioners that are engaged in the Dharma in a meaningful way. I think it's helpful to adopt three attitudes. And I think it's helpful to bring these to mind whenever we engage in any Dharma activity, especially one of study, but also one of our everyday practice. So the first, I think it's useful to adopt an attitude that is recognizing that we need to have the long view or the big picture, right? This idea that we're aiming for Buddhahood. We're not aiming for short-term goals. The goal we're having as part of our practice, as motivating our practice, is a big goal. It's the biggest of goals. And it's not going to happen tomorrow. And that's okay, right? So instead of looking for the short-term wins, we have to have a long view and always remember that even if we experience obstacles, obstacles are just speed bumps to the much bigger picture, right? So we should always remember that we have to have an attitude that supports the long view, that the goal is Buddhahood, that we're in it for the long haul. It is a marathon, not a sprint, if we want to use kind of a contemporary idiom, right? And so that is useful to remember and to adopt that attitude, that I'm always moving in the right direction, but I need a long view. I can't focus on this life only. I can't focus on my immediate happiness, and I can't focus on my immediate obstacles. Those aren't the big picture. Now, in addition to the long view, we need to have the wide view or the expansive view. And what that is that recognizes that in order to that recognizes that the path to Buddhahood includes many different aspects, right? It's complicated. If there's just one little thing we could study and that would make us Buddhas, that'd be great. But it's not that easy, unfortunately. Now, of course, there are many different things we can practice that'll improve our lives and improve our minds. And for some people, all they need is one particular practice, and that will transform their experience. I'm not denying that, when I, really had a strong understanding of the power of bodhicitta, it was transformative, right? But we need to look at all these different aspects of study if we really want to progress. Bodhicitta and wisdom have to come together. And that means we have to study all the aspects of the path, which are very varied and sometimes can feel overwhelming, right? Because whenever you say you have to study one thing, well, then that relates to this thing, that relates to this thing, even if, you know, you say you want to study how important it is to have a perfect human rebirth, because that's what gives the opportunity to practice Dharma and the motivation. You say, well, then there are 18 parts of perfect human rebirth. So it's not just one thing you're studying, it's 18 things, right? So there's so many different details, and that can feel overwhelming. So the wide view recognizes there are so many details, but I have the capacity to engage with them at my own speed, right? I'm not going to let them overwhelm me. I'm going to recognize that it isn't simple or easy. If it was easy, we'd all be Buddhists. But I have the capacity to engage it at my own speed. I recognize that I can pick up what is useful to me, and the other things, I come to them and I incorporate them into my experience, my understanding, as I grow in my practice. So the long view, that Buddhahood is our goal, and that is a long practice. The wide or expansive view, that there are a lot of details we have to study, that the path, it has many branches. And then maybe most importantly is the relaxed view, right? The view that we can't hold on to everything so tight and expect ourselves to be perfect tomorrow. Because if we do, we're just going to be underwhelmed and unhappy. We have to be, we have to have a sense of grace for ourselves, right? We have to recognize that, yes, we should always be working on our mind, always be developing our practice, always be pushing ourselves. But we also have to recognize that we're not, like I said, we're not going to become Buddhists tomorrow. So we have to be realistic and say, what can I realistically do with the opportunities I have available to me, with my circumstances, my privileges, whatever it is I have available to me? How can I use that and push myself closer to Buddhahood? But I have to not be stressed out about it. If your practice is making you stressed out, then you have to reevaluate your practice. Now, your practice, especially Lojong practice, is going to force you to look at the parts of your mind that you don't want to look at, right? The self-cherishing mind that's guiding all of our activities that we don't want to believe is really guiding our activities. So it can be scary sometimes. And they say when you first have an understanding, the very first real understanding of emptiness, the sign of that is you have a moment of terror because it is overwhelming and can be scary. That's one of the signs that you have an actual understanding of emptiness. The first understanding is a moment of terror because you realize that nothing is the way you ever perceived it to be. And saying that is easy, but really understanding that, even for someone that's that practiced, there's a moment of fear. Right? So we have to be relaxed with ourselves. We have to recognize that this is a process that we are part of. I've said many times, but it's worth saying that, when I was caring for my mother, she was dying. I spoke to my teacher that I live with here in India. He would call me maybe 2 or 3 times a week just to see how I was doing because I was in the States taking care of her. And his two pieces of advice every time he called, the two pieces of advice he said are "Sempyo mache," don't stress out, and "Leleche," relax. Leleche is aramse, right? Just go easy, you know. And then he'd say, kalejo, kalejo. It means go slowly. Everything is slow, right? That was his main advice. It wasn't deep Dharma advice. It was just relax. There's no point in stressing now, you know? And that is what it means to have the relaxed view. That's not saying ignore the teachings. That's not saying give yourself an excuse to do whatever you want. But it's saying that we're not perfect. This is samsara. Samsara is hard. So we have to do the best we can do. And that's why we need all three of these views to work together. That's the important thing. If you only care about the relaxed view, but you ignore the long-term view and the expansive or wide view, then that's not going to work. Okay, you need to have all three, and that makes us a well-rounded student who is making our practice complete and it's capable for the long haul, basically. Right. So as we continue our study today, let's try to adopt these three attitudes with this material. I meant to say at the beginning, I'm always open to questions, both in person and online. We are trying to just be cognizant that if someone has a question, try to keep the question onto whatever I'm discussing. So I don't mind being interrupted if it's a question that comes directly from what we're talking about. Um, but otherwise, let's try to leave other questions that are not related for either the end, if there's spare time at the end, or we can find a private time to discuss them. But try to keep our questions that are part of the class on topic and try to keep it to maybe one or two questions per person so we don't, you know, take away the opportunity. So for those of you online, I won't be able to see really if you like raise your hand or I don't have a chat in front of me. So you can just speak up if there is a question. Though I know we also have someone monitoring online so they can help as well. Oh, we don't have today. Anyway, so that's just I've been asked to remind people of our question policy. We want to be a little more clear on it. So as we study mind training, I think a lot about what it means to come to a Dharma teaching, right? And I don't know much about the cultural experience of religious practice in India, but I know growing up in the West and growing up in Christian communities, when you go to church, let's say, this is not true for all churches, especially evangelical churches, it's not true. But for most churches, you go to a church service, maybe 90 minutes, maybe 2 hours long. Most of that is ritual. And you're going through ritual, you're reciting ritual prayers, and then there's like a sermon that lasts maybe 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes. And that is where you're kind of doing the learning. And there's readings from the Bible and the Gospels and things. But it's mostly ritual that you're going through. Here, it's the opposite, right? It's me giving a sermon for 90 minutes, which you're studying, you're actively learning as students. So you're going to the equivalent of seminary, essentially, right? Which is not the same thing in other religious traditions. And so I have to think about how do we incorporate this study with our everyday life? Because it's so easy to think, I'm going to the Dharma Center, I'm going to the temple, I'm going to learn Buddhism. But studying isn't enough, you know? And whether those rituals or not, I'm not speaking for how other religions operate. I'm just saying that studying alone isn't enough. And rituals help. Rituals are one of the ways that you can bridge study and personal experience. That's why rituals have a place. That's why offering prayers. That's why doing prostrations. That's why these somatic experiences have a place in our practice. They serve as a bridge sometimes for some people between the intellectual understanding and the experiential understanding, right? But we need to find in our lives the way to make these teachings part of our practice. Just studying them isn't enough, you know. And when most of our class on the weekends, or when you come to the temple, is based on study, which is important because we need to learn this material. Study is critical, but we also need to learn how to make it part of our lives. And the traditional thing we talk about in our tradition is that we have these three aspects of engaging with material. We study, contemplate, and meditation. So whenever you're engaging in new material, or even returning to old material, first you have to study that material. So by studying it, it means hearing it for the first time or you're reviewing it. You're learning something new, whether you read it in a book or you're having Dharma discussions with your friends or you're hearing it from a teacher. That's what it means to study, is to actively consume new data, let's say. And then contemplation. That's when you actually are struggling with it. You're saying, do I understand this? Does this make sense to me? Do I have doubts about this? Do I see all the different branches that come from this idea and how they can impact my everyday life and the different aspects of my life, right? So contemplation is the most active part because now you have all this new data, but you're processing it. And then we have meditation. So once you have processed it and you have some level of conviction, at least a little bit, then you start incorporating it into your practice such that it becomes um, inseparable from your mind, right? So you meditate on something to make it indivisible with your own mental experience. That's what it means to meditate on something, to become familiar with it, right? That's what the verbal root of meditation is, in Tibetan at least. Become familiar with something, to create a habit of it. So we learn new material, we develop conviction and understanding of it, and then we bring it into our practice such that it is always there. We study compassion all we want, and we can even contemplate on compassion. So we have a good understanding. I'm convinced that compassion and bodhicitta are the most useful ways to live in the world, all these things. But if I don't meditate on it, then when I go out into the world and people frustrate me and I react with anger instead of compassion, what's the use of having studied compassion, right? If I don't meditate and make my experience and my understanding of compassion part of my lived experience, part of my mental response to the world around me, then it's not doing anyone any good, right? It's like a lot of book learning that doesn't ever leave the classroom. So we need that meditation to help bridge the gap between our everyday life and our Dharma experience so they become inseparable. And so it seems sometimes, or it can seem to me, that our daily meditation practice, whatever it may be, seems very paltry, right? Like, what's the point of me sitting here meditating, watch my breath for 15 minutes, and then focus on compassion for 15 minutes? Okay, great. What's the point of that? The point of it is that when you do something like that, even just mindfulness meditation, when you do that regularly, then you the world. You notice that the way you react to any external stimuli is much more intentional, right? It's much less reactionary. That's just for mindfulness meditation, which isn't even necessarily a Buddhist practice, just a basis, right? So then you can imagine if you've done the work to make your mind inseparable from compassion, then compassion is there for you. If you've done the work to try to understand emptiness or to try to understand how the self-cherishing mind hijacks your experiences, right? If you've done that work in meditation, then when you're out in the world, you see those afflicted emotions, those reactionary emotions coming up, and you have the ability to stop them. You have the ability to subdue them and say, that's not the way I want to be in the world. That isn't going to bring me happiness. That's not going to bring others happiness. So it seems like meditation is a very personal, independent process, right? And to some extent, it is. The actual work of meditation you do on your own. But the purpose of meditation is so you can live in the world outside of the meditation, right? So we have to find a way to make sure that all of this intellectual learning we're doing, we're bringing it into a meditation practice. And we're using that meditation practice to then live our lives. So we're bringing the Dharma into our everyday lives. That's what's most important. If we're not doing all those three steps of learning new material, contemplating it, understanding it, wrestling with it, and then meditating on it so it becomes like second nature to us, then we're missing out on the practice. So we need to always work on all three of those. I know, I come from an academic background. Before I became a monk, I got a master's degree, right? I like study. If you just give me books, I'll be happy all day just reading books. That's not enough. That's not good enough. It's a good habit. It's better to be interested in study than not interested in study, especially when there's so many things we have to really struggle with, right? So many things that are uh, totally backwards from our worldly perspective. So that's a good instinct. But if I stop there, I'm not going to really get anywhere, right? So you have to incorporate all three: looking for new material, engaging in new material, contemplating it, wrestling with it, trying to understand it, developing conviction in it, and then meditating on it. And the reason you do it that way is because they feed each other, right? The more you meditate on something, then you learn new things about it. Just naturally, you develop a deeper understanding of it. Then that brings about new questions that you have to struggle and think about. You think of new applications. And then that brings more things to meditate on. So it's a constantly evolving process. It's not static. I know, for instance, for me, and this is true for many Westerners, when you start studying the Dharma, it can be hard to believe in the six realms of rebirth, especially for Westerners who weren't born in this idea, who weren't born into a culture which is naturally inclined towards this idea, right? And so the advice I was given was, okay, you don't have to believe in this right now, but you don't deny it. Don't say it must be wrong. Just put it aside and focus on the things that make sense to you. And then slowly, slowly see. you know? So that's what I did. And as I started studying karma more, all of a sudden I had the realization that karma doesn't make sense if you don't believe in rebirth, right? Because karma doesn't exist in this life only. My actions and the results of those actions don't all happen in one life. So it's impossible to really have conviction in karma and not conviction in the six realms of rebirth. But that was a natural thing for me. At first, I'd put that to the side because it wasn't helpful for where I was at in my own spiritual journey. But by studying something else, and then it brought new information for me. It brought something new for me to wrestle with. And then I had to think of how does karma relate to the six realms of rebirth, right? And how does, and that's something we're talking about here too in this mind training, right? Is how does karma relate to the self-cherishing mind? How does our experience of karma relate to, or excuse me, how does our experience of suffering relate to karmic activities we've done in past lives? These are all things that once you understand one thing, you see all of the branches that give you more avenues of study. So we need to bring our practice into our study into our meditation, which brings it into the world. And mind training, I think, is perfect for that. The reason mind training is so great is because, in my opinion, is mind training isn't easy, right? Like it asks us to look at our ego, which is the scariest thing to do, but it's giving us very practical, actionable advice, saying this is a very specific thing you can do. Here is something very specific you can do to help get rid of your self-cherishing mind. And it's not easy. Like the advice, if you follow the mind training teachings, is not like, for a lazy person. It requires courage and it requires dedication, but it's actual specific advice. So for me, that's very helpful, right? At its core, I think mind training is very simple, which is we should always just be checking, is this action motivated by my self-cherishing mind or not? And if it is, then how could it possibly be benefiting me or anyone else, regardless of the immediate experience of happiness or benefit? And so the better we understand how insidious that the self-cherishing mind is and how it insists that it is for our own benefit, once we realize that, then we start reviewing our actions and we see, am I doing this because I'm working out for my own profit, my own gain, my own reward, my own popularity, or trying to avoid the opposites of those things? Or is this really have a different motivation? So at the heart of mind training practice is really just looking at that self-cherishing mind, which is something, like I said, it's scary to do because the self-cherishing mind has run our life. So I have private classes with one of my teachers right now. He's the abbot of Gyume Monastery, but he's on break from Gyume, so he's at Sarah. So I go to his house once or twice a day for private classes. And he was saying that, I don't know if I should say this, but it's okay. This is what he said, that the part of Sarah that he's in has a lot of quite big houses. And he said many people that are in this part of Sarah, they're very wealthy. And they're just kind of, and I don't know what wealthy is by monk standards, but they're very wealthy. The houses are very big and nice. And he goes, and they don't, what do you say? He said, I don't ever see them doing any practice or recitations or anything. So in the morning, when I go outside and I'm reciting, I'm the only one. I don't see anyone else doing it. And sometimes I think, I'm a crazy person. I must be crazy. I'm the only one out here doing this. And I say, Geshe-la, and I said, from the mind training teachings, they say that if you really study self-cherishing, if you really work to eliminate the self-cherishing mind, and you really follow the Dharma, that all worldly people will look at you and think you're a crazy person. Because from the perspective of a worldly person, to actually give up the self-cherishing mind is something that only a crazy person would do. And he laughed and he said, yes, 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 yes. It's always nice when I can connect to him that way. But it's true, right? It asks a lot of us to face our self-cherishing mind and to give it up because we spent our whole life following it. And we're taught over and over again that the way to live a happy life is to seek out the self-cherishing mind and to do whatever it says, to give into your id in all aspects, right?
Very good question. So you're saying mind training asks us to look at our self-cherishing mind and see if an action is self-cherish, guided by self-cherishing or not. But what about thoughts? What if one has self-cherishing thoughts, but tries not to act on them, and so maybe succeeds in stopping the action, but doesn't succeed in stopping the thoughts then?
Mm.
Sorry?
Mm.
I have
I don't know if I'm right.
Okay, yeah, sure.
The intention is the mental factor of action, no?
Oh, and then yeah, okay. I mean, you said you wanted to answer, so yeah.
So that means that what is the
Yeah, so okay. Let's go like this. So so the question is, if we're doing this work, we may recognize the self-cherishing mind before it motivates our actions, so we change our actions, but we still have those minds. The truth is, the more you do this practice, the fewer of those minds are going to arise. But the first step is to get rid of the coarser levels, right? So being able to engage in worldly and what appear to be worldly activities, your everyday activities, and not have the self mind be the motivating factor is huge. And that takes a lot of work to get there. So if you've reached the ability to do that, that's incredible. Of course, we still have afflicted minds. You are going to continue to have afflicted minds. Not you, I mean you in general, until you have a direct realization of emptiness. And then even then, you still have to work. The only actual antidote to totally eliminate self-cherishing is to eliminate the self-grasping mind, as well as the seeds of self-grasping. And that doesn't happen unless you are an arhat or you are a eighth-stage bodhisattva, right? You have to have direct realization of the nature of reality and meditate on it to actually eliminate those minds totally, right? So instead, what we're doing is trying to decrease their power, decrease their strength, and when they do occur, train ourselves to notice them so we don't act on them. So that is the goal. And so being able to recognize those minds is incredibly powerful. Until you've had a direct realization of the nature of reality and meditated on it, that's the only actual antidote to eliminate, totally uproot the self-cherishing mind. You have to uproot all the afflictions, right? So the goal is to not engage in any activities based on those minds. Now, as Deepti mentioned, there are three types of activities of body, speech, and mind. So even having those thoughts is a type of activity, but it is not nearly as heavy. To have a self-cherishing thought, but then not do anything with it, is not nearly the same as to have a self-cherishing thought and then say something that's inappropriate or to behave in an inappropriate way or do something like that, right? So there is, having those self-cherishing thoughts is not great, but recognizing them is then virtuous, right? So you're not accumulating negative karma just by having those thoughts. You accumulate negative karma by having those thoughts and letting those thoughts motivate activity, right? Or mixed karma, let's say, not always negative, but like this. So to bring our study into our everyday life, we need meditation as the bridge, right? Study, contemplate, meditate, and then mind training is like a shortcut that gives us direct advice on how to live these experiences in the world. And this text specifically is using mind training and the study of karma at the same time. So as we talked about with this text, it's looking at the results, our experience of suffering, and then it's saying these experiences of suffering are the results or the conditions that cause this experience come about as the ripening of negative karma I've created in the past. Right? So each one of these verses we're covering in this section of the text is showing us experience of suffering, and then it's telling us what the negative action was that caused that experience to ripen. And then it's showing us how the antidote. So what is the thing we can do instead of engaging in that harmful action? Now, but what isn't said in every one of these verses is the negative karma ripens as the conditions through which we experience suffering. But it's the self-cherishing mind that actually creates that experience of suffering, right? That's the important thing to remember. That just having difficult conditions doesn't mean you're going to experience suffering as a result of those difficult conditions. The suffering comes from the way you relate to those difficult conditions. We're in samsara. We're going to have difficult conditions. We've created many, many causes for difficult conditions, right? Right now, we've all created the collective cause to be having a teaching in the dark. Like that, it's that simple. So we could be here together trying to have this Dharma teaching and be very frustrated and upset and worried that we don't have power right now. Or we can say, this difficult condition is not going to allow us to be distressed, right? So some people here, especially the people that are in management roles, may be very frustrated or worried that there's no power. It may make them very anxious. And others may say, who cares? It doesn't matter. It's the same external condition, but the reaction is going to be different, right? Some people may experience it as suffering and others may not. So that experience of suffering is due to how our minds relate to the difficult circumstances we're in. So these verses don't mention that explicitly. That is the implicit part that comes. They mention it explicitly, but not every single verse, right? They mentioned it earlier in the preliminary verses, and it's going to come at the end of this section. There's one verse that just reminds you the self-cherishing is the real enemy. But in the individual verses, it's not reminding us of that. It's saying these are the negative conditions that are the ripening of negative karma. The experience of these negative conditions is what they call the wheel of sharp weapons. And it is due to these specific or these types of negative actions that these negative conditions have come about. And therefore, these are the opposite types of actions you can do to prevent those negative conditions from happening again in the future. But studying karma this way is also one of the really useful things to study if you want to actually try to apply the teachings to your everyday life. And that can seem like a strange thing to say because we can't, karma and like the actual way karma works is an extremely hidden phenomenon, quote unquote, right? So to actually understand that this specific experience is due to this specific action in my past lives, only Buddhists can understand that level of understanding. However, we can have a general understanding of karma, of how it works, of what kinds of actions lead to what kind of results. And the reason I say that when you have some taste of karma, it's something that you can actually practice in everyday life. You can bring that teaching into your everyday life, is because whenever you experience any experience, an experience of good fortune or of pleasure or of discomfort or of suffering, you can recognize that the reason these conditions have come about and the reason I'm experiencing these conditions the way I am is due to some action I've done in the past. Maybe I created some virtuous action in the past that's ripening in a way that I have the opportunity to experience joy now, or I created some negative action in the past that I'm experiencing suffering now. And when you have that context, it gives you a much more expansive opportunity to relate to those negative circumstances in a non-reactionary way, right?
Yes. Thank you.
So for example, now I don't have any not putting myself up on a pedestal as having any realizations, but recently I've been sick the last couple of days. Since Wednesday, I had to go to, ironically, I brought my teacher to the hospital because he was having some problems. So we went to Mysore to go to the hospital. And as soon as we got back, I had big stomach problems. And, all Wednesday night, I woke up every hour to use the bathroom. All day Thursday, I was out of commission, headache, fever, everything. All day Thursday, most of the day Friday. Only today, I'm starting to feel a little better, right? And yet, nowhere. And so I recognize that's difficult, right? Like no one wants to be sick. No one wants to have these things. I have class every day with my teacher, trying to go to class and be sick at the same time. It's not pleasant. I knew I had to come here this weekend. Yet I was never mentally or emotionally, I had no distress, right? Not because I have some great realization or ability of my emotions, but just I understand that this experience of suffering right now, this physical illness, whatever it is, this physical ailment or illness, it's a result of negative actions I've done in the past that are ripening as my body being sick right now, or ripening with me meeting with the causes to be sick. There's no point in me being upset about being sick. It's not going to get me healthy any better. The way that I get healthy better is by drinking water and resting, doing the worldly things that I know I have to do. That's going to help my body right now. To help my mind, I recognize that my experience of discomfort is because I'm a samsaric being who's engaged in negative actions in the past that are ripening as sickness right now. Being upset about it isn't going to help me, right? And so for me, having that realization that this sickness wasn't me being judged, wasn't me being punished, it was just the result of something I did. It gave me the distance to not be overwhelmed by that feeling of sickness, to not say, wow, why am I sick now? How did this happen to me? You say, okay, this is what it is. I have to do the best with what I have, and that's a small thing. And it's only being sick for a few days. But if you can do that, it's very helpful because the amount of distress we add to our physical suffering is so high. The emotional distress we add is so much greater than the physical suffering has to be. So that's the point of studying karma, or one of the points. And then the flip side of it is, if you can understand, as this text is teaching us, what are some of the specific actions that cause those conditions, then you can ensure that you don't create those conditions more and more in the future, right? So if your goal with this kind of text and this kind of practice, we have two goals. One is to understand our current experience so we can relate to our experiences in a healthy way and not a reactionary way. But then two, to create the conditions that these negative experiences don't arise in the future. So we're doing two things at once. But what we're not doing is trying to get rid of the immediate negative conditions or pretend they don't exist, right? Because we can't. We already are experiencing them, right? What we can do is relate to them in a healthy way and not allow them to cause us emotional distress and more suffering. Yes, please.
Like in my case, I can say that things are going absolutely good, but suddenly from all directions, you find that you are literally toppled from whatever condition you are in. And personally or emotionally or maybe work-wise, you see that I think you've got problems from all sides. And you're not able to gauge why suddenly something like that has happened because you are absolutely caught unaware. So the only thing that because of the learnings, I only can attribute it to karma. But then why sudden? Why not that you have already had some inkling about it and maybe you were prepared, but here you don't have any preparation time or anything like that. And you've got problems from all sides. It's not only one.
So there's a few answers. I think one answer is quite often, just in a worldly sense, never mind a Dharma sense, we have difficulties and obstacles that are occurring in small. We acclimate ourselves to difficulties to the extent we don't realize we're doing it, and so then we build up a tolerance that when it snaps, all of a sudden they've been building up the whole time, but we've been convincing ourselves that it's not a problem, right? That we haven't been looking, we haven't been cleaning up our garden. And so the mess gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And all of a sudden it reaches a point where we all of a sudden say, oh my goodness, it's this big. But really, if we'd been working the whole time slowly, it may not really all come at us at once. That's an experience. We experience it that way, but that's not always how it happens. And then on the side of that is when you're experiencing, let's say it is very sudden affected difficulty that arises, whatever it may be, right? Doesn't matter. Let's say you lose your job. So you get in trouble, you lose your job. All of a sudden, it feels like everything else is happening at the same time. In reality, usually, these things may be small enough that you have the emotional strength or spiritual strength to overcome them. But since you're already in a difficult place because of this one big thing, then you don't have the emotional space to deal with the smaller things. So then they get magnified out of proportion. So everything feels like it's happening at once. But in normal times, most of those things would be small enough that they wouldn't bother you. But you're already in such a dysregulated space that those small things become big things, right? So that's just from a worldly perspective. That's like a worldly psychological perspective. The Buddhist perspective would say similarly. The thing with, it would say a very similar thing is that we need to look at our practice all the time because it's very easy to convince ourselves that we're not suffering. It's very easy to convince ourselves that our self-cherishing mind isn't in control, that really I'm doing this for the right reasons. And when we do that, because we've done that since the beginning of samsara, that's not like a fault of us as individuals. That's what it means to be a samsaric being, right? We spend so much of our time deceiving ourselves. So we don't pay attention to all the small little things we're doing that are causing obstacles for ourselves. So then when we experience the results of the obstacles, they've added up in a way that we aren't prepared for. But we're constantly doing the work, then we can try to notice those obstacles more quickly. But having said that, we still have the experience of feeling everything's coming at once, right? So then what do we do then? Let's say we've done our best. We still have this experience now. Everything's going wrong at once. What do I do now? Right? Well, there's a few things you do. One, understanding karma doesn't mean being comfortable and accepting fate. It doesn't mean accepting the status quo. It doesn't mean saying, okay, this is fine. It's fine that everything is miserable, right? No, that's not what karma is. Karma is giving you the explanation as for why things are being experienced the way they are, but it's not saying you have to suck it up, right? So karma is giving you the space to say, okay, what do I do about this? So I don't grab onto this as the end of the world. I don't grab onto this as being the thing that defines my life and my experience, but I understand where it comes from. So therefore, I can experience it without that type of attachment. So karma is helping you develop a sense of contentment and calm that then gives you the clarity of mind to say, what do I need to do in both a spiritual sense and a practical sense to overcome these obstacles, right? And so if you're experiencing genuine everyday worldly obstacles, you might have to say, I have to prioritize. These obstacles are ones I have to deal with first. And then once I've overcome those, then I can do these, then I can do these. Or maybe you can do a little bit at the same time on all directions in slow steps. It depends on the circumstance, right? But in order to actually have the clarity of mind to analyze that, you have to be able to take a step back from the experience of suffering and the experience of being overwhelmed and say, okay, this experience is all ripening now as a result of the karma I've done in the past. Now it's my responsibility to recognize that, not be overwhelmed by it, and do the best I can with whatever resources I have to both accept this situation and try to get out of it and do what I can to ensure it doesn't come again in the future. Right? For most of us, at least for me, it often comes in retrospect. I am so better at knowing what to do after I've already done it. Do you know what I mean? Like I can look at all the mistakes I made yesterday and said, oh, if I had done this differently, it'd be so much easier. Why'd I do it that way? Right? Right? Yeah, exactly. But here's the thing. That's important. It's important to do that. Because if you know, this is why I encourage, as one of the meditation practices, I always encourage is to try to do meditation at the end of the day, where you review all of your activities that you did throughout that day and say how many of these are motivated by self-cherishing, how many of these are motivated by Dharma, how many of these were infused with compassion, how many of these were infused with anger, right? And not for a judgment, not for saying, oh, I'm such a bad person, but if you do a postmortem every day and you say, how could I have done that better? Then when it comes up again, you'll be closer to having the instinct towards the more virtuous or more Dharma appropriate response, right? So that the ability to at least look back on your actions and realize that you did not behave in a way that was ideal or in concordant with this, your spiritual path, and recognizing that, not beating yourself up about it, but recognizing it, that's a step forward. Because that way you can make the distance between your reaction and your spiritual progress can get smaller and smaller and smaller. And again, that's the point of meditating, right? That's the point of taking what you study and you have conviction in into a meditation practice. So it becomes inseparable from your thoughts. So you don't have to think about what would I do now if I was going to act out of compassion. You don't have to think that way. You just do it, right? So having the ability to look backwards is useful, but ideally, eventually, the more we progress, the quicker we can respond. Okay. With that, let's jump back into the text a little bit. So as a reminder, this text was written or composed by Dharma. Excuse me. He was one of Atisha's 3 teachers who taught him bodhicitta. Atisha was taught by 3 teachers, or he studied bodhicitta under 3 teachers, 2 in India and 1 in Sumatra. The one in Sumatra is the most famous one, that's Serlingpa, also known as Dharmakirti Sri. The 2 in India were Maitreya Yogi and Dharmarakshita. And he taught this directly to Atisha, and Atisha taught this only to Dromtonpa. That's the only time he taught this text. All of Atisha's Lojong trainings, his mind training teachings, were only taught to Dromtonpa, to his heart disciple Dromtonpa. But then Dromtonpa taught them to other geshes, to other teachers, you know. So all of the Kadampa geshes that we call, all come from the lineage of Dromtonpa, who come from Atisha. So this is one of the earliest mind training texts that exists. Dharmakirti was in the 9th century. Now, the outline of this text, it's roughly 2 outlines. Yeah, the power lost, the microphone got a little mixed up. The 2 main outlines of this text are the basically first 100 verses or so are focused on conventional bodhicitta. And then the last 17 verses or so are focused on ultimate bodhicitta. So ultimate bodhicitta is understanding the nature of reality, understanding emptiness, right? And conventional bodhicitta is what we normally think of as bodhicitta, the desire to become Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Now, in that section of conventional bodhicitta, the first 50 verses or so are focusing on mind training, are focusing on karma. So first, it's focusing on how to make suffering part of your path, how to transform the afflicted minds into the path of practice, like a peacock would, as they say, right? As a peacock consumes poison, allows that poison to become nourishment. The mind training teachings show us how to take our experience of suffering and take those experiences as spiritual nourishment. So that's how the setup is. And then from verses 9 to 48, essentially, we're talking about showing karmic cause and effect. And like I mentioned earlier, each one of these verses is going to show an experience of suffering, and then it's going to tell you the karmic cause of that experience of suffering, or that the karmic cause that allowed for the ripening of the conditions that create that experience of suffering. And then it's going to give you an antidote, right? An antidote that may be combined with Tonglen practice or may be independent of Tonglen practice. And that antidote may not change the circumstances now, but it will help prevent them from coming in the future. And so that's the section we're in right now. And so many of these verses are somewhat self-explanatory, yet I seem to not be able to go through them quickly. So that's the name of the game. So we got through verse 22 last week. So we're going to start with verse 23. When others find fault with whatever we are doing, and people seem eager to blame only us, this is the wheel of sharp weapons returning full circle upon us from the wrongs we have done. Till now, we have been shameless, not caring about others. We have thought that our deeds did not matter at all. Hereafter, let's stop such offensive behavior. Right? So the experience that is showing is even when we're doing things correctly, people are going to blame us. They're going to point out our flaws. They're going to criticize us, even when we do things right. And I know we all have that experience, that you get criticized unfairly, right? And it feels unjust. And so here, the mind training response is when you are criticized unjustly, instead of saying, hey, I don't deserve that, saying, no, I do deserve that. Not because of what I did in this life, but because I've engaged in the causes in the past, such as being shameless, such as not caring about others, that have created the conditions for you to be criticizing me in this life. Right? And therefore, to speak out against it is only to enable your self-cherishing mind. It's not to actually defeat your self-cherishing mind. And therefore, when others criticize me, the way I should respond is by making extra effort to stop engaging in behavior, such as being shameless, such as not thinking my actions matter. And what it here means to be shameless is that to not care that you're engaging in non-virtuous activity. So we talk and embarrassment and as virtuous mental factors. And one of them is shame is not caring about engaging, or shame is caring, sorry, the lack of shame is not caring that you've engaged in non-virtuous activity when you are by yourself. And the lack of embarrassment is not caring that you're engaging in non-virtuous activity when you're in the company of others. So then shame and embarrassment are the opposite of that, recognizing the harm of engaging in negative activities, right? Which then leads to regret. So here, because I have existed in such a way that I was shameless, that I didn't really care of what I did, and I didn't think that my deeds mattered at all. So I didn't pay attention to karma. I didn't pay attention to the non-virtues I was doing. Because of that, that is the reason I'm experiencing this now. I think, whenever I talk about shame and embarrassment, I always have to qualify like what Tibetan Buddhism means by shame and embarrassment, because people have such negative connotations to the ideas of embarrassment, right? In the contemporary world. And I think the reason we have those negative connotations is because we get embarrassed for all of the wrong things. Like we get embarrassed. Our experiences of embarrassment are based only on our worldly desires. Like think of the last time you were embarrassed about something. And why was it? And was it because you're engaging in non-virtue, or was it some worldly thing that your self-cherishing mind was being upset, right? You said something foolish and people laughed at you. That's your self-cherishing mind. That's not embarrassment, right? So what we think of as embarrassment is actually just the self-cherishing mind acting up. And so because of that, our personal experience of the idea of embarrassment is actually self-cherishing. So that's why when we talk about embarrassment and shame, I have to qualify it to make sure that what we're talking about in this Buddhist context is not our everyday experience of embarrassment, because our everyday experience of embarrassment is probably just self-cherishing. Not guaranteed, but probably, right? And then for some religious traditions, I have to also clarify that we grew up with the idea of shame, meaning I'm a bad person because I did this bad thing, or because I acted against the status quo, or because I exist in a way that's different from others. And so that idea of shame isn't about the fact that I engage in negative actions, but it's somehow a statement about my quality as a being, right? And again, Buddhism has no place for that, right? Yes, I engage in negative actions in this life and in past lives. Doesn't make me a bad person. My shame isn't me saying I'm a bad person. It's saying I made mistakes and I wish I hadn't done it. And I'm going to do everything I can to make those mistakes. The same thing is saying I should feel guilty and that I'm clearly a bad person because I made these mistakes. So it's distincting, it's creating, or it's recognizing the distinction between the actor and the action. I'm still responsible for those actions, but I'm not a bad person because I engage in those actions. And guilt and some contemporary ideas of shame are focused on the individual, not the actions. So I always have to clarify, why are we so, it's okay. When we think of embarrassment, or shame, these are considered virtuous mental factors. You know, if you've studied the mind and mental factors, there's many different subcategories. And even if you have studied them, you've only studied them in part. And the reason I say that is the way we normally study them, we talk about the 51 mental factors, right? That's only one categorization. I think Dharma Kirti lists 77. And there's other ways you can divide them into many more. So just because you study them once, you haven't studied it exhaustively. But in all those categorizations, there are groups of mental factors that are always virtuous, right? So generally, we say the 11 virtuous mental factors is the way we normally study them, right? The virtuous, and included in the virtuous mental factors are shame and embarrassment. So actual shame and actual embarrassment are always virtuous. So then, if you had this experience of embarrassment, then it wasn't an act of virtue. It probably was an embarrassment, right? It doesn't mean it's easier not to have those sense of embarrassment because we grew up in such a way that our self-cherishing mind dominates everything we do. But it's useful to remember that that's not what we mean when we say embarrassment. So let's stop this offensive behavior. What's interesting here is it's not saying, at least for this particular remedy, isn't saying let's stop the non-virtuous behavior. It's saying let's stop the non-virtuous behavior that isn't accompanied by shame or embarrassment, right? This is particularly showing how shame and embarrassment, or the lack of shame and embarrassment, lead to others criticizing us. Because if we act in such a way as we're trying to protect our self-cherishing mind, so we're only going to receive compliments and not critiques, then that means we're acting shamelessly. And so the consequence of that is we create the conditions to be critiqued even more in the future. Because we're working so hard to protect our self-cherishing mind and to prevent ourselves from being critiqued, to receive only praise, to not receive a bad reputation. Right? Yeah.
Like, for example, during work, I work criticize me for something. So I will follow what you said, and I would like to say, I should not think like that. I'm like, why am I always chasing after praises and but then this thought enters my brain that my God, if I keep cultivating this or something, I might not be up to promotion or something like that. And it worries me, and it just worries me, not anything else.
Yeah.
So what should I do?
So for those of you who aren't as fortunate as I am to live in a monastery and life as a monk, you have to deal with the real world, right? Which is true, right? And so you have different things you have to navigate at the same time. So if you're at a job and someone criticizes you, never mind if it's your boss, if you're in a professional situation and you're criticized, sometimes you have to defend your reputation if you hope to keep your job or be able to keep your space in your job. And so you have to find a way that you say, well, why am I doing this? Why do I need to keep this job? Am I doing it because I'm so attached to my popularity, to my to having people respect me? Or am I doing it because I want to engage in a spiritual practice, and having this job gives me the financial security and the means that allow me to engage in spiritual practice? And also through this job, maybe I'm helping people or whatever the job may be. So therefore, your reason for protecting your reputation in that regard isn't because your self-cherishing says, I don't deserve to be criticized. It isn't because that person is wrong and they're unfair in their criticism. It's you're trying to at least have a Dharma motivation that says, look, I'm doing this because the worldly expectation is that I have to do this in this scenario, but I'm doing it with a mind that isn't attached to my self-cherishing mind, right? I'm doing it with the recognition that for professional reasons, I may need to do this, but it's not because I'm upset personally and I'm not taking it personally, right? And that's a hard thing to do. It's very hard. Like it's much harder to do that than to just, I think, to balance that line than it is to just practice Lojong 100%. But you live in the world, so that means you have to deal with the more difficult path, right? So that's what you have to try to find to do, is how to balance your real world necessity with your Dharma practice. And it's going to be the same. You're going to experience obstacles when you have a family, when you have other responsibilities. You have to say, how can I engage with those responsibilities in a meaningful way that is not shirking the responsibilities I have, whether they be to my children, to my family, my partner, to my job. But how can I do so with my ultimate prime motivation always being a Dharma motivation? Even if my actions aren't going to be 100% what I would do if I had the best opportunity. So we're always doing the best we can with whatever we have, right? Now, the only thing I will say is it can be very easy to make excuses for ourselves. And so then when I get criticized at work and I immediately respond back and say that's not true, then I say, oh, no, that wasn't my self-cherishing mind. That was me being, using skillful means. And so we can be very deceptive to ourselves, right? So it's important that we're not deceptive to ourselves. But sometimes you have to engage in those worldly practices as long as you're part of the world. And so you have to find the balance, If you lose your job because you don't defend your reputation when it is surreptitiously maligned, then that's not going to be helpful to you. So, and it'll create an obstacle to you continuing practice Dharma. So you have to find a way to do both at the same time. Do you have a question? Oh, I thought. You could also just become a monk or a nun and give up the world. Then it makes it a lot easier. That's not true, though.
That's the easier way.
I say that. Okay, 1 second. I say that, but it's not actually true, because the truth is your suffering, whatever it may be, is coming from your mind, right? It's not coming from the circumstances. So it doesn't matter how far away you run. Your suffering comes with you. Your self-cherishing mind comes with you. It just finds new ways to act up. Whether you're living in the monastery or you're living in a house, it just finds new ways to act up. So as a monk or nun, we have more freedom than people living in the world do, but we don't escape the self-cherishing mind. We just have different opportunities to deal with it in different ways. There's a question online, yeah? So guilt, regret from guilt. So, guilt isn't really a Tibetan idea. Like, we don't see guilt coming up as one of the mental factors. So the way I describe it, and I think of it, guilt, as focus, as I was saying earlier. So regret, well, let's start with regret. Going back to mental factors, regret is what's called the changeable mental factor, which is sometimes regret can be virtuous, sometimes it can be non-virtuous. And what causes regret to be either virtuous or non-virtuous is the object that you are regretting. So if you regret engaging in virtue, then the regret itself becomes non-virtuous. If you came here today to attend this Dharma teaching, and at the end you're like, I wish I hadn't done that. I should have gone to the movies instead. Then that's going to be a non-virtuous type of guilt. Right? That guilt will be non-virtuous, because hopefully what we're doing here together is virtuous, right? On the flip side, if you recognize, I engage in a non-virtuous action, I engage in gossip and lying, I engage in any other, following the self-cherishing mind, and you develop regret towards that, then that regret becomes virtuous. So regret itself is quote unquote changeable depending on the object. So what regret is looking at your action and realizing that it was not the right action to do and resolving not to continue engaging in that action. So ideally, the regret, like I said, is focused on a non-virtuous action. What guilt is then going one step beyond that. So regret itself, I should say also, regret and shame and embarrassment are very closely related. At least the way I think of it. Shame and embarrassment are always virtuous. Regret and virtuous regret comes immediately following shame or embarrassment. So shame and embarrassment are the minds that are concerned with your activities and you're not performing non-virtuous activities when you're alone or when you're in front of others, right? And it's wishing to not engage in non-virtue. And then when you have engaged in non-virtue, the next step is regret, which is recognizing it. So right after embarrassment or shame, you have the moment of regret that says, that was a non-virtuous act. I wish I hadn't done that. That didn't help me. It didn't help others. All it did is add to my suffering and to others' suffering. And therefore, I don't want to do that act again because it is not beneficial. So that's the mind of regret that are very closely related to shame and embarrassment. Guilt is then taking that and saying, clearly, I'm a bad person. clearly what I did means I'm a bad person. I deserve to be suffering. I deserve to be in samsara. Whatever negative conditions there are, they're my fault. I deserve them. So it's taking that action and then saying that is an inherent quality of me as an individual, right? So to some extent, it's misunderstanding the nature of reality, saying that things inherently exist one way or the other. It's denying the changeability and the constant impermanence of all phenomena. And it's taking the action itself and saying there, because I performed a negative action, that qualifies me as an individual as a negative person. And then that's what I understand guilt to be. And so I don't perceive guilt as being useful in any way. I perceive it as misunderstanding the nature of reality and misunderstanding your ability to affect reality. And what I mean by that is if you actually cultivate these minds of guilt, then what's the point of ever changing? You don't think you can change. If I'm a bad person, then it doesn't matter what I do. Everything I do is going to be negative, right? So you lose the incentive to try to engage in virtue because you've convinced yourself that nothing you do can ever be virtuous, right? So you have created kind of like a pity party for yourself. That makes it harder to then practice virtue. So that's what guilt is, I think. Guilt is taking, and again, I know we don't practice guilt on purpose, right? But our culture tells us we should feel guilty. And I can't speak to Indian culture as much, but a lot of Western culture is taught that you should feel guilty for being different, for being whoever you are, or for doing something wrong. And we use guilt as a weapon quite often. We try to make people feel bad about themselves. I know all the time growing up as a kid, like you do something wrong and you're taught you're a bad person because you did this thing wrong. And maybe what you did was wrong. That doesn't make you a bad person, but that's like our instinct is how we teach our children. And the way we punish our children is by making them feel guilty about who they are, and about the things they did. And I think it's damaging, right? And so we shouldn't do that to ourselves as adults when we have control over it. And if we did it to other people, that's because how we were raised. Like I'm not saying this is cultural expectations that we're fighting against. Because cultural expectations, whether they are Indian or American or any country, are worldly expectations. There's samsaric expectations, right? And that's the whole purpose of our practice is to fight against samsara. Okay, so I think that covers guilt a little bit. Let's try to keep going with a few verses. Let's see if we can get. I don't know if anyone remembers, when we first got to this section, I really thought we'd get through all 30 or 40 of these verses in one class. Like I had notes on all 40 of them because I was like, they're so easy. We'll get through them in one class. And it's been what, a dozen classes? One class, I thought. I'm so foolish. So we're in 24, right? This one I like. When our servants and our friends are annoyed by our habits, and after a while they cannot stay in our home any longer, this is the wheel of sharp weapons returning full circle upon us from wrongs we have done. Till now, we have imposed our bad habits on others, and hereafter let's change and show only kind ways. When we are such a giant pain in the butt that even the people we've paid to help us out can't deal with us anymore, then we gotta change things. But what I like about this is, right, what's important about this is, again, it's reminding us that my immediate actions may be the conditions that cause people to be frustrated and to leave and not want to be my friend. But that itself is because of my negative karma. And what I mean by that is negative, that's the ripening of negative karma. And so, for example, I'm sure many of us have friends in our lives who are giant pains in the butt, who like are constantly getting on our nerves, but they're still our friends and we still make time for them, right? And maybe we're that person. Hopefully not, but maybe we're that person. But we still have that friendship. And here it's saying that the reason that friendship or, your servants or your friends get annoyed with you and leave is because that's the ripening of negative karma. So here, when it's saying, when I leave my bad habits behind, it's not saying that the bad habits that I have right now are the cause for them leaving. It's the immediate condition which is causing them to leave. But the reason they're leaving is because I've created the causes in the past for people not to have any patience for my bad habits. Do you see what I'm saying? There's a slight difference there. Okay.
What bad habits? Like
so here it's saying anything that's non-virtuous, really. Anything that's well, we can think of any of the non-virtuous activities, but here it's being very general. But it's saying when you're engaging in basically treating others in a way that you don't want to be treated, right? So what would cause your friends to not want to spend time with you? So it could just be that you're like pompous and you're annoying, right? That you feel like you always have to have the last word in every conversation. That, any of these things that like people are like, oh, he's just a jerk. I don't want to spend time with him because I don't have fun around him. He makes me feel bad about myself. He's always criticizing me. Even if you're criticizing them, even if you criticize people because you are generally wanting to help them, that's not always like a pleasant experience to be on the other receiving end of, right? So that can be like a bad habit. So it's not always like, I'm abusing people or I'm doing these like very gross negative activities, but just we know annoying people, right? We all know annoying people. And like not like disastrously annoying people, but annoying people that you don't always want to spend time with. That sometimes when they call you over coffee, you say, well, I'm busy this week, maybe next week. But here's the thing, that's called lying, and that's negative karma. So if that's your instinct, you have to find another way to do it. But that's what we mean by get bad habits, right? But so my point here, though, what's interesting here is, so again, with every one of these verses, the wheel of sharp weapons coming around is the ripening of the experience of negative actions in the past. So what this is saying is, right now, I'm engaging in bad habits, whatever. Let's say of being a pompous jerk and of being annoying, right? But the reason that my friends and my attendants can't spend time with me and they leave my home, the immediate condition are my bad habits, but the ultimate condition is that I've created the experience in the past of such bad habits that I am now alone when I engage in these habits, that people can't stand me. Which is why I was saying we know people who have these bad habits that we're still friends with, that we're able to overlook their bad habits. So that would say that bad habits themselves don't always cause people to leave. But having those bad habits that then cause people to leave is the wheel of sharp weapons coming. So it's both the immediate cause and the long-term cause, both, right? And so the remedy, let's change and show only kind ways, is actually one of the few remedies that will hypothetically help your immediate situation as well. If you stop being annoying, maybe people will like to spend time with you. But the bigger picture and the more important picture is that you are creating the causes in the future to not have discord between yourself and others, right? Now, what's important about this, though, when it says show only kind ways, you're not pretending, like you're not being inauthentic. You're trying to make your authentic experience in the world one of kindness, one not of selfishness. So you're not just pretending to be kind to others, right? So the word show only kind ways can seem like you're just pretending. That's not what it means, though, right? It doesn't mean being inauthentic. It means being aware that your actions affect the people around you in a both worldly sense and a spiritual sense. And sometimes you also have to worry about the worldly sense. Even if my goal is to engage in spiritual practice, you have to find how that balances in worldly activities. Like, for example, as a monk, I don't take meal after midday, or I do my best not to. When I used to go home to visit family, you know, uh, especially when my mother was working still, the only free time you have is dinner. So you gather, everyone eats dinner together, and that's the time you spend together as a family. And I'd sit at the dinner table without any food, and it just made everyone feel very awkward, right? And so then I was like, maybe I should eat dinner because the people would feel less awkward. But then I mean breaking the monk vow for the purpose of like worldly benefit. So I had to find a way to work between those two things because that ended up, I don't think, was an appropriate response. But I realized that me engaging in my spiritual practice was causing distress to others. And so how do I find the bridge to not do that, right? That's a small example. Thank you. For me, or in that circumstance, you mean? In that circumstance, I still know I generally ate around midday because dinner wasn't until like 8 p.m. at night, so it didn't change that. But once my family got more comfortable with me, so I would always have like a drink or a beverage, or I'd do something like that. And then I could be part of the conversation and they just got comfortable that I wasn't going to be eating with them. So it was a matter of having a conversation with them and them realizing that this wasn't about them. And once they got over that, then, but for me, I have a very supportive network of friends and family. So it was easy to mm, help them overcome their awkwardness. And that made me overcome my awkwardness, you know. But I know other people who, and even, one example, I don't know if any of you know Nick Rebush. Nick Rebush is one of Lamy Yeshe's oldest students. And he's not a monk anymore. He's a good friend of mine from Boston. He is from Australia. Now he lives in Boston. And when Lama Yeshe did his first tour, Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche did their first tour of America, I believe. Maybe it was England. Either one of their first tours in the West. Nick had an opportunity to visit like a great aunt that he had never met before, who was like this old Russian woman. And she had never met him, didn't know he was a monk. He was already in his monk's robes. And you have to imagine this was in like 1970s, right? So all the cultural experiences were already different. Here's this elderly like Russian woman, I think living in America or maybe in England, I don't remember which. And here's like her young hippie monk of a nephew who she's never met before. So she already like doesn't want him to leave the house. Like she's like doesn't want to introduce him to her friends. And then at dinner, they have like an aperitif. Like she has an aperitif before every meal, right? And so he thought, okay, one small aperitif makes her feel comfortable. I'm doing it for her benefit. So he drank this small amount of alcohol to help make his aunt feel less awkward because he's like, I'm already making her life so difficult. Like I came here to meet her. She's part of the family, extended family, but this is really hard for her. So I'm in my robes, all these things. So he did that. And then he went back and he told Lama Yeshe. And Lama Yeshe looked at him and he said, a monk doesn't touch a drop of alcohol ever. And that was Lama Yeshe's only response. Oh. So it showed Nick that he thought he was doing something helpful, but he wasn't using skillful means, and he wasn't actually balancing his responsibilities as a monk with the worldly responsibilities. So for me, that story is the first one that came to my mind when I'm trying to like sit at a table of people eating food and sitting there silently and not eating. You know what I mean? So how do I balance my responsibilities as a monk with that? But my point, so there's no one easy way to do it. You have to see who your company is, right? My point though is that I then went out of my way to make sure my actions weren't causing discomfort to others. And that allowed me to maintain my own vows, my own spiritual practice in such a way that wasn't causing discomfort to others. And so for those of us who are practicing any sort of spiritual path, if we live with family that aren't doing that, it can become awkward. And you're like, well, I have to spend 20 minutes meditating tonight. And they're like, well, I want to go watch Netflix. And you're like, well, wait 20 minutes and I'll come watch it with you, but let me do this, right? We have to find a way to balance our own spiritual practice with the needs of our family and our friends and our partners to prioritize our spiritual growth. But if we can do so in such a way that isn't making others feel uncomfortable, that is ideal, right? Because we don't want to create more tension than we need to, right? Sometimes we can't avoid it. And so then we have to see what's more important to us. And if we're as skillful as possible and it's still causing some discontent, it may be because they are more attached to the worldly life and there's nothing you can do about that. So you have to, it's not always like an easy fix. You have to see what's going on in your life, right? But doing your best to reduce friction and tension with others as a result of your spiritual practice is important when you can. Yeah. Huh. Yeah. I talk all the time about how I think for contemporary 21st century Buddhists, we have to learn how to make our experience of the everyday world. Like I said, we have to bring the Dharma to our everyday life. And that's going to involve engaging in pop culture, right? For most of us, right? Whether that's reading books, listening to music, watching TV, we can bring a spiritual intention to those things as well, right? So we can do that. Now, if I'm watching Netflix with my sister, and I'm like, here's like your motivation, then that's ruining the experience for her. So you keep those things private, right? We often talk about when you have, oh my goodness. Oh, how come time moves? Wait, it does. This clock is a little faster, so I was a little bit jumping on. When you have, generally we say there's three types of vows, right? We have the vows of individual liberation, the Bodhisattva vows, and the Tantric vows. Vows of individual liberation, they come in 8 flavors, right? So those would be the layperson vows, as well as the monastic vows, are all contained in what are called the vows of individual liberation. And then you have the Bodhisattva vows and the Tantric vows. And we say generally, our Tantric vows are secret practice. Our Bodhisattva vows are our inner practice. And our vows of individual liberation are our outer practice, right? So the way we engage in the world, we should have whatever are in our pratimoksha vows, we say, those are what we show to the world. Those are most important. So for a layperson, those are not killing, no stealing, no lying, not engaging in sexual misconduct, and no consuming intoxicants, right? And for a monk, I have 253 pratimoksha vows, but those 5 are the heart in many ways. Those should be the what we show to everyone all the time. Then the inner practice, what motivates those from the most immediate sense, should be our bodhisattva vows. So that bodhicitta, that wish for others to be free from all suffering and that we will achieve Buddhahood so we can benefit others, that and all of the many branches, right? There's 18 root bodhisattva vows, 46 branch bodhisattva vows. Those should be our inner practice that are motivating everything we do. Then our secret practice is when we start practicing Tantra. That's the practice that is then like our inner fire that is actually fueling everything else, but it's not something we show. It's not something we display. It's not something we talk about openly, right? And even the bodhisattva practices isn't necessarily something we talk about openly. They're inner practices. Sometimes we do talk about them, sometimes we don't. Especially when you look at these mind training teachings, or even a better example is the 37 Practices of a Bodhisattva by Tokme Zampo, which is a mind training text that combines mind training with the Lamrim tradition. If you look at those verses, they're giving you specific activities that a bodhisattva would do. And some of those, or rather all of them, go against worldly activity. But if you announce, oh, the reason I'm doing this is because I'm living like a bodhisattva, well, then you're not really living like a bodhisattva, right? Like if you have to announce yourself and show it off, then, so that's why it says that's an inner practice, that people may see it and you can talk about it with others in appropriate contexts, but you're not like, wearing it on your sleeve like that. So you have to decide what that balance is. And, so you can watch Netflix or you can engage in pop culture activities and you can do so with a spiritual mind. But if you're announcing to everyone, hey, I'm doing this as part of my spiritual practice, then you're going to probably just annoy people and you're kind of diminishing it as well. But I think it's critical. The idea that anything in our life we can't bring into our practice is foolish, right? The whole point of Dharma is to overcome samsara, not to overcome some samsara, but leave other samsara alone, right? Like the whole point of Dharma is to overcome all of our suffering. And so we should be able to take a Dharma mind and apply it to anything we do. And so, like I've said, in an ideal world, when we had achieved a high enough level of meditative stability and realization, if we've had a stressful day, a busy day, then we could just go sit and meditate quietly, and that would get rid of all of our stress and put us in a better state of mind. Sometimes we can't do that because our level of practice isn't there yet. Sometimes turning on Netflix for a half hour is what we need to do. Listening to music for an hour and just like calming down to music is what we need to do sometimes, right? Because we aren't Buddhas yet, because we're doing the best we can. These are methods we know that have connected with us before. So sometimes it's okay to do that. So you just try to do it with the mind that doesn't grasp onto this, to say this worldly activity isn't my source of happiness. This isn't my source of calm. This isn't a refuge. The Dharma is the refuge, but this is a skillful means I can use because it is something I have in my toolbox that is going to allow me to then calm my mind to such an extent that I can engage in more explicitly Dharma practices as well. And doing that in a healthy way is part of a Dharma practice, right? And then on the flip side, I think engaging in pop culture all the time, like I read novels quite a lot. I read a lot of fiction novels, and I try to read them with a spiritual mindset, right? With a mind of compassion, with a mind of understanding. I read novels and fiction especially to learn something about myself and to learn about others and the world around me. And every time I engage in a text, I try to learn something new about myself, no matter what the text is. Even if I'm reading pulpy genre fiction, there's something new I can learn about myself. Why do I have certain emotional reactions to this type of prose or to this activity? Why do I respond in this way? How come I think these characters are good and these characters are bad? All of these things, I can use them as fodder for my own spiritual development, right? And I can also use them just in a worldly sense that like it helps me calm down when I've had a very stressful day. And like I spend my whole day reading Tibetan, which is like difficult, no matter that I've read it for 20 years. It's still a lot of work to do everything in translation. And like it hurts my brain. So sometimes just reading something in English is just like nice. You know what I mean? It's just nice to do. And it's hard for me to read Dharma in English because when I read it in English, then I have to go back to see the Tibetan because I don't always have confidence in the translator. So it actually becomes more stressful for me sometimes. So sometimes when I'm reading in English, I'm not reading Dharma. I have to read something else, right? So if I can do that in such a way that isn't grasping onto that worldly activity as if it were real happiness, but is allowing me to take my Dharma practice and filter it through a different way of being, then it can be useful. We have to bring our Dharma practice to the world. If we're Buddhas, we wouldn't have to do that, but we're not. So we do the best we can. Okay, let's try to get through one more verse at least, maybe two. Let's see. So verse 25. When all who are close turn against us as enemies, this is the wheeler sharp weapons returning, full circle upon us from wrongs we have done. Till now, we have held grudges inside us with anger, with thoughts of sly methods to cause others pain. Hereafter, let's try to have less affectation and not pretend to be kind while we harbor base aims. Right? So here it's showing that those people who we have done so much to benefit in this life, who we care about so much, whether it be our family, our friends, our children, our lovers, our partners, our teachers, whoever they may be, we have held them in high esteem. We've gone out of our way to help them, and they turn on us for some reason. Okay? Them doing that is the result of our negative karma in the past, specifically negative actions of holding grudges and reacting with anger towards others. Here, especially, is talking about, sometimes they say hypocrisy and deceit. And the distinction between those two is sometimes instead of hypocrisy, they say dissimilitude. Yeah, exactly. Dissimilitude. So there's a couple of different ways of lying, basically. And so they're all different types of lying. So one is lying about your good qualities, and the other is pretending that you don't have the bad qualities you have. So hypocrisy is like pretending to have good qualities you don't really have, and then deceit, or let's say deceit, is pretending not to have bad qualities that you do have, right? So they're both basically lying about the way you exist in the world to others. And so this type of lying, here it's saying let's have less affectation, right? So be honest with the people around you. And that's going to prevent you from creating the conditions for others to turn against you. Right? Now, again, when you study this text on your own, it's a reminder that having less affectation now, not holding grudges now, doing your best not to react with anger now, isn't going to change the fact that maybe someone you cared for has turned around and treated you like an enemy, right? Because that's already happened. So what this text is teaching us to do is in the immediate, it's giving us the context, or it's allowing us to understand the context, so we no longer have a reactionary immediate response, but can have a level-headed spiritual response. But it's not changing the current circumstances, because the current circumstances have already ripened. They're the ripening of past karma that we've already done. So it's giving us the space to understand the current circumstances and then helping us prevent them from coming again. So not having less affectation, not pretending about who we are, not lying about our real goals, being nice on the outside so we can then, undercut people, not being deceitful. That may not stop the fact that people are already turning against us, as it's saying, but it will prevent it from happening in the future. So that's an important thing when you study this text on your own, is to remember these remedies aren't going to change. They aren't meant to change the conditions that you're already experiencing. The conditions are coming about due to actions you've done in the past. These remedies are helping you show first the cause of the current conditions and then how to prevent them from happening again in the future. And then the unspoken message for every one of these verses is the reason you experience these conditions as suffering is because of your self-cherishing mind. And I know I sound like a broken record, but it's really important to realize that.
There's a character that I know. She's like a very kind, very good-hearted woman, and but she kind of gets a lot of verbal abuse from her in-laws. But it's quite common in Indian society, especially. So, when I think of her, it says that this is the wheel of sharp turning, because everybody kind of
Mhm.
abusing her in one
Yeah.
way or the other. So, what if I want to give her any advice or something? She should accept all that, just thinking that the wheel is returning.
So it can be hard to give Dharma advice to people that don't have an interest in following Dharma, right? So you have to be skillful. Because if I tell someone that the reason you're experiencing the suffering, the conditions for the suffering are a result of karma you created in the past, and the reason you experience it as suffering now is due to your self-cherishing mind, that is not always going to be helpful to them. Right? If you don't, it's very easy to take these teachings the wrong way. It can very easily sound like you're blaming the victim. And if someone doesn't have some understanding of karma and you just kind of say that to them, it may not be helpful, right? So you have to be skillful and see what is the most useful advice to give her. First off, is she seeking your advice? You know, like just because she's in a difficult situation, maybe you giving her, I'm not speaking to you specifically, but like maybe you giving her advice isn't what she needs. Maybe she just needs you to offer her praises or to celebrate her in ways that are meaningful, right? Maybe giving her advice to say, don't worry about your family. They're just acting like fools. You don't deserve this. Maybe that isn't actually going to help her. But what could help her is then you doing the opposite and you modeling the type of behavior you think she deserves, right? So that's one possibility is to say maybe she doesn't need my advice, you know? Um, and then aside from that, I think you just have to be skillful. And there are ways you can talk about this thing, these kind of teachings that some people can hear and can be useful to them, that this isn't your fault. Like this experience, you can help them try to. I'm trying to think of how I bring these to my family. You know, it's a big thing. No one in my family is Buddhist, and none of my friends outside of India are Buddhist. Not none, but very, very few. And so it's so tempting to try to like, tell them why they're wrong about everything. I say that facetiously, but you know what I mean, right? And that's not helpful at all. Like that's not at all going to help anyone. So the best way for me to be an influence in my family is to model what I think is healthy behavior, whether it's quote unquote Buddhist or not. But when I do try to bring things, it's helpful that my sister is a therapist, so we often speak the same language in that way. Is you can help people realize the difference between, as we're saying, the conditions and their reaction to those conditions, right? So just the fact that someone is insulting her, or criticizing her, or turning their back on her, and then her experiencing that as a cause of suffering are not the same thing. We conflate them in our everyday life. We conflate the conditions and the experience, right? And so to separate the conditions and the experience is something we learn to do. And we learn that the experience comes from our self-cherishing mind, wishing the conditions were different than they really are, right? So you don't have to use that language because the language of the self-cherishing mind may not be helpful for someone that hasn't studied the Dharma or isn't interested in it, depending on the context. But to recognize that people insulting you or criticizing you, those are just empty words. If you allow those words to harm you, then you have some control over that, right? At least some. And so maybe that is one way in. It depends on the person, depends on the circumstances. But that is one possible way, is to show that our experience of suffering and the conditions that allow that experience to ripen aren't the same thing. Experience and conditions are separate. And we have control over one, but not over the other. And so that is something you can bring sometimes to help others. And you can find skillful ways to do it. They don't involve Dharma language, right? Like I never speak Dharma language with my family, but I try to infuse everything I do with Dharma. I can't help it. I'm a monk, but you have to find ways around it. One of the I'm sure I've told some of you. The first time I went back to the States as a monk, so I was wearing my robes. I was walking to the library actually. And my sister and my mother had dropped me off, and I had to go to one place, and then I was walking to the library, and they're going to meet me at the library. So I was walking across the green in my hometown, like the common green outside the library. And these two, was it my hometown or is it Boston? Either way, these two big biker dudes are walking towards me. And like they're both bigger than me, shaved head, full leathers, covered in tattoos. And of course, they see I have visible tattoos, and they see me, and I see them coming right for me. These are big, intimidating guys, and they go, "Hey," I'm like, "Hi, how you doing?" And they go, "When did you figure out that everything in life is bullshit?" I'm like, "This is great," because they were genuinely interested. A, they wanted to see if they could ruffle my feathers, but B, then when I didn't let them ruffle my feathers, we had a great conversation, right? We had a great conversation that what is expected from us from society and how we understand ourselves being isn't always the same thing. And giving into society's expectations of us isn't going to lead us to happiness, right? And so we had a really wonderful conversation. But I didn't use Dharma language. I didn't use like the Buddha said this, that. They already knew I was using Dharma language because I'm dressed like a monk, but I was able to relate to them in a way and speak a language that was meaningful to them, right? And so you can find the language to help others sometimes that isn't Dharma language, but is your Dharma knowledge filtered through your worldly experiences. And sometimes that's what we have to do when we're dealing with people that don't have a specific interest in practicing the Dharma. And yeah,
it says here when all who are close against when all who are close turn against them. But you might not have everyone turning against you. You might have
Yeah, this doesn't mean everyone at the same time. It means anyone who is close turn against us.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not telling you, like you said, I know you said, but I'm just it's not telling you how to deal with those people who are close to you and have turned against you. It's not telling you how to do that. It's just telling you how to be so that you, in the future, people who are close to you won't turn against you. Is that right?
That is correct. However, often, if we practice that remedy, it can also have an immediate effect as well. Right? So the goal of hereafter, let's try to have less affectation, not pretend to be kind while we harbor base aims, right? So that's the remedy is telling us to engage in that action to prevent creating the negative causes that will ripen in the future as having those close to us turn against us. That's what it is promoting. But sometimes engaging in that action now can also change your current circumstances as well. But that's not the point of it, right? The point is to prevent it from happening in the future and prevent and recognizing the relationship between your self-cherishing mind and the current conditions that are ripening now. Okay, let's go through one more verse. We're pushing on the time here. Let's go through one more verse, and then we'll have some final time for questions. Okay. So we're in verse 26. When we suffer from sickness and such interference, especially when gout has swollen our legs, this is the wheel of sharp weapons returning full circle upon us from wrongs we have done. Till now, without shame and with no self-control, we have stolen or misused what others have given. Hereafter, let's not take anything offered to the three jewels as if it were our own. So here it's showing that stealing, especially stealing from holy objects and holy beings, can cause physical ailments. I'm not really sure why gout is the specific one that's called out, but it's showing that physical sickness often, the experience of physical sickness and physical ailments, I guess specifically gout. I know what gout is. I'm not sure why gout is specifically mentioned, is what I'm saying. No, it's a little different. Gout is the buildup of certain types of uric acid building up as crystals, causing pain. Anyway, regardless, the point is that actions of stealing, specifically stealing from the three jewels and from other holy objects and holy beings, create the conditions to experience physical illness. Okay, and so when I experience physical illness now, I can realize this illness is the ripening of karma of having stolen from the three jewels, and therefore I'm not allowing my experience of physical illness to overwhelm my mind with despair, and by committing myself to not taking anything from the three jewels again or stealing in any way, shape, or form, I help prevent the conditions for me to experience physical illness in the future. Now, you can say, well, I don't steal anything. So, like, what is going on? I'm not, we have to think about here, how often do we misuse those things we're given specifically? Now, this is to some extent a little more directed at monks and nuns, but in general, it's true for all of us. First off, the more general thing, if you buy something to offer to the Buddhas, whether you're going to come to a puja and you want to make an offering at the puja, or you want to make an offering on the altar here, or if you have an altar at your home and you want to make an offering there, and you buy something and you have these offerings, and you say, oh, I'll just have what I bought, like 3 pieces of fruit. I can have one for myself, and the others I'll put on the altar. Once you bought that with the intention to offer it to the Buddhas, it no longer belongs to you. You've already offered it to the Buddhas. So then to take that is stealing from the Buddha. It's the equivalent of that, right? That's the one thing. The other thing that is sometimes said, and not everyone agrees with this, but some teachers say if you buy something to offer on your altar, only so when you take it off your altar, you can eat it. That's the equivalent of stealing from the Buddha. So if you say, I really want a Kit Kat bar, so therefore I'm going to buy a Kit Kat bar, offer it to the Buddha today, and then tomorrow I can eat it, right? So there are some teachers who say the food things that you offer on your personal altar at home shouldn't be things that you like to eat, because that way you can ensure that you're not actually offering them to yourself, but that you're actually offering them to the Buddhas. But then other teachers say, no, you should take the most delicious things that bring you the most joy is what you should give to the Buddhas. And as long as you do it with a pure mind, that this isn't for me to eat later, that this is just a temporary resting spot, you're really giving to the Buddhas and it's okay. So you have to check your own mind. There's different teachers have different types of advice, but you can understand the idea that make sure that when you make offerings, you're making them fully and honestly, and you're not taking from them. Now, here, what this also means for monks and nuns is that when we are offered things, you know, there are other mind training teachings that say for monks and nuns that don't treat the Dharma, don't treat the property of the monastery correctly, or don't have the right mind, all of the food that gets put into their begging bowl is like the molten lava from hell that they pour down their throats. Right? So what that means is, as a monk or nun, monks and nuns are considered objects of virtue, which is to say, as lay people, when you make offerings, you pay respect to them, they're an opportunity for you to create more merit, right? And the reason monks and nuns are objects of virtue is because of the vows we hold, right? We hold more vows than lay people, and our vows empower us to engage in spiritual activity to a greater extent. And therefore, making offerings to us, enabling our practice, doing anything like that, showing respect to us, is a greater opportunity for merit for you. But if I don't live up to my end of that bargain, then the way I think of it is like every extra vow I have is like a multiplier. So when I keep it purely, it means I can accumulate more merit, and that's great. But when I keep it impurely, it means I create more negativity. So if you are giving me offerings, but I'm not actually living up to the expectations of a monk, not to say your expectations, but like the expectations of me as a monk, and I'm not using your offerings in an appropriate way, then those offerings become like my one-way ticket to a hell realm, become like swallowing molten lava, right? There are numerous teachings that say that your beggar bowl just becomes a receptacle for the burning copper from the hell realms. So you have to be very careful as someone who receives offerings. And whenever you receive, and so that's as a monk and nun, the pressure is even greater. But think when you receive any gifts from friends or family, that you use them in an appropriate way, whatever those gifts may be. You use them in an appropriate way. You don't squander gifts that others give you, whether it be physical gifts, whether it be emotional gifts, right? Gifts of their time, gifts of their energy, gifts of their care, their prayers, their well wishes, but you don't squander gifts others give you. You use them in the most appropriate way, right? That's important. It's not the same thing as stealing. It's not the same thing as taking what doesn't belong to you, but it is in the same family of negative activity to squander things that were given to you honestly and to not use them appropriately. Obviously, it's heavier if you are squandering something given out of faith than just something given out of friendship. But at the same time, you want to make sure you use what is given to you, not waste it in a meaningless way. Now, the flip side of this, when you're giving to someone, whether you're giving to a monk or a nun or a Dharma center or your friend or your family, spiritual, worldly, you cannot be attached to how they use that thing. Because if you're attached to how someone uses that thing you give them, you're not actually practicing generosity. You're practicing attachment. It's a very nice attachment, but it's still attachment. So this is like a double-edged sword. Your responsibility as the receiver and your responsibility as the giver are totally opposite. As the receiver, you should do your best to receive it in such a way that it was intended and to use it in such a way that aligns with the goals of the person giving it to you. But as the person giving it, you should have no expectations. Once you've given it, you're done. That is your job. You wanted to make this offering, whatever it may be, a spiritual offering or a worldly offering, whatever it is, and then you wash your hands of it. If you have expectations or you have qualifications about how they use it, if you get upset about that they didn't use it the way you wanted to, then you weren't practicing generosity, right? Or it wasn't real generosity, it was an attempt at generosity. So you can see that what your individual spiritual practice of receiving and of giving aren't the same thing, right? They both have a different set of expectations to line up with your spiritual practice. And having no expectations when you give is really difficult. It really is. I've seen students get frustrated because I've seen them give like really expensive gifts to teachers, and then those teachers like take that expensive gift and just give it to the next person in line. Especially you have to see like, when I went to Singapore to see Lama Rinpoche, he gave Yamantaka and Dogen Dharma initiations in Singapore, and there's Long Life Puja. Maybe some of you came to Long Life Puja. I think Shanti Yajnik did. Maybe some others. 2016, maybe. It's a big Long Life Puja. So in Singapore, the devotion is like very intense. And so at the airport, even, there were just like hundreds of people waiting for Rinpoche at the airport. And there was just, never mind, like at the Dharma Center, at the airport, there was a receiving line that took an hour of people just like wanting Rinpoche to give them his blessings, offer a kata, and then make an offering to him, right? And I didn't see him do it there, but you can imagine when you have like 100 people lining up to see you, you get a lot of stuff, right? And sometimes if you're just getting money or cash offerings, then those all, all of those offerings get put into the FPMT. But if you get offered things, you don't need all those things, especially if you're a monk like Lama Zopa Rinpoche. He doesn't need all of these things. So he'd often I've seen him, someone gave him like a really expensive thing of chocolates, and he's like, oh, thank you. And then he just gives them to the next person in line. He's like, I have diabetes. What do you want to give me chocolate for? And so you see people get really mad. They're like, no, I bought that for him. And you're like, yeah, you gave it to him. That's the story. I've never seen that happen, but that's what people say. That someone gave him a Rolex watch and he gave it to the next person in line, either him or Lama Yeshe. And I didn't. That's like an apocryphal story, but I don't doubt that it very well could have happened.
But he could have sold it and given the money to FP.
Doesn't need. What's the benefit? But see, that's like, I will say, like something like that. When you see someone like Lama Zopa Rinpoche or Lama Yeshe, they understand cause and effect better than we do. So maybe giving that Rolex to the next person in line, let's say that really happened, would have been more beneficial than selling it and taking that whatever $5,000 and giving it to the FPMT. Like he can understand things in a better way than we can. Right. But anyway, my point is though, I've seen people make really beautiful offerings with the intent to make great offerings. They go out of their way, but then they have such attachment to those offerings that if they aren't used the way they want, they get frustrated, which shows that they're not actually making a pure offering. So when you're on the receiving of any kind of generosity, whether it be spiritual or worldly, right? Whether it be a gift or whether it be time, patience, comfort, any of these things, do your best not to squander it, not to misuse it. And when you are giving, make sure you're not attached to how they use whatever it is you're giving them. And both of those are relating to this verse, that we don't want that inappropriate, that stealing items, especially from the triple gems, or misusing items that are given to us, squandering them, can be a cause for physical sickness. So if we want to help, that's not the only cause. There are other causes that there are other negative karmas that ripen into physical illness, but one of them is stealing, especially from the triple gem, or misusing offerings that were given to you. Okay. I guess we're going to stop there.
So this presupposes that you were connected with the Dharma in some previous life. That's how you would have done this.
Well, no, because, if you're in Bodh Gaya, people make offerings at the stupa all the time, right? And people that aren't Buddhists could just go and steal them, right? Just go up to a stupa and there's a bowl of fruit, set it on a stupa, they just walk away with it like that. So you don't have to necessarily we're predisposed to a Dharma. Though I would say that the fact that we're here studying Dharma now indicates that more likely than not, we had the opportunity to study the Dharma in the past life. The fact that we've come together with the perfect human rebirth and all the causes and conditions that allow us to study Dharma now suggests that we had pure morality as well as stainless prayers in the past. So chances are good that we practiced Dharma in the past. But here, that's not necessary. Yeah. Still stealing. Not maybe. It is. It's not maybe. I mean,
it's not so very ethical. You just pass it on. Either.
I'm not quite sure, like an example. What do you mean?
So somebody gives you a thing. The person rather that I will be used to it.
Yeah, you don't have to. It depends on your circumstance. It depends on your circumstance.
You can keep it, but taking something and giving it to the next person, that person, it's not very ethical.
Well, it depends on who we're talking about. So if we're talking about teachers who receive things from their Buddhist students, right? Then it's perfectly ethical, right? Because the teacher is engaging with the Dharma in a meaningful, direct, spiritual way, and is understanding that the students should be giving with the best mind of generosity, right? So to some extent, these examples of Lama Zopa taking something that was given to him nicely and then giving to the next person is him teaching us about what generosity looks like, right? So that's one way to look at it. So when you look at lamas and other people that are that have some sort of realization or at least have some level of understanding, that's perfectly ethical what they're doing. Now, in our circumstance, it just depends. I can't give you an answer. Sometimes if someone offers you something and you say, you have no use for it, and you know that if you were to give it to someone else, it would hurt their feelings, then you can say, look, I have no use for this. If you give it to me, I'm just going to have to give it to someone else. And then you give them a chance to do something else. But the truth is, though, again, what you're doing by doing that is that you are making accommodations for their worldly practice. You're recognizing that their practice is not generosity, because they're attached to the outcome, and you're accommodating that. Well, maybe that's the right thing to do in that circumstance. I'm not saying it's not. You have to assess the circumstances, but recognize that what you're doing is you're making an accommodation for their samsara. It may be the right thing to do. I think the use of the word ethical is not the right one. I think it is not a non-ethical thing to do. I think that depending on the circumstance, you may recognize that even if it is ethical in terms of virtuous karma, non-virtuous karma, you may understand the other person may create more non-virtuous karma as a result because they're attached to it, right? The person that gave it to you. And so therefore you may want to try to mitigate that. I don't think ethical is the right word to use. I know what you're saying. And I think that you have to be skillful, but recognize that what you're doing when you do that is you're accommodating their worldly behavior. And maybe that's what you have to do. Maybe sometimes that's the best you can do, is sometimes you have to help people from hurting themselves as best you can. Maybe that's the tool you have, right? So I'm not saying don't do that, but I'm saying be aware that what you're doing is you are supporting their samsaric practice, right? Which is okay sometimes.
Yeah, but sometimes you're not doing that. You're just being worldly. I mean, during, say, Diwali, there will be people who will come and give you gifts. I mean, what do you do? If you say, sorry, I don't want your Diwali gift, that's hurtful to that person. Not just hurtful, it's like just so antisocial kind of a behavior, saying, sorry, I don't want your Diwali gift.
So I'm saying you have to know you have to look at the situation and see what the best thing to do is. So as a person receiving a gift, or as a person receiving something, you have to do your best not to squander or misuse whatever was given to you. Okay, but that doesn't mean that you have to go along with the samsaric ideas of others. So you have to find that balance. If you know that saying I don't have any use for this, please don't give it to me, is going to cause more distress for them, then clearly that's their samsaric attachment. But maybe you can try to help them out. So you have to do what's best, but recognize that when you're giving, you should have no attachment to the outcome. And when you're receiving, you do your best to use things responsibly, especially things that are related to the Buddha Dharma Sangha, to the three jewels, or to a lama, to a teacher. But in general, you don't want to squander or waste gifts. And if you can do something in such a way that doesn't cause harm to others, then you should. But ultimately, you have to do what's the most spiritually efficacious thing. Right?
So, for instance, if someone has the intent to give something guilt, but so let's say that person keeps doing evil things, but you want to keep them, have this habit of throwing them away because you want to use them. It's best to just say to that person, okay, stop doing things.
If you can do that in a way that will not cause them to cause more harm, then yes, that's generally best. If you can be like, look, I appreciate these gifts that you're giving me, but they're not useful to me. I'm not able to use them in a meaningful way. So maybe you can funnel your generosity into something else, and that would be more helpful. Then you can try to do it that way. Yeah. 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 I mean, some people will take that personally, right? So you have to be skillful, because they might be like, well, you don't want me to buy you gifts. That means you hate me. So you have to just be skillful. Yeah. But yes. Yeah.
Explain it to.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Not using
yeah.
We get it a lot every month we have pretty much children's birthdays, and then 3-4 on the same day. So the number of sweets we get and varieties.
But sweets, I mean, sweets.
Sweets is okay.
How is it okay?
No. What I'm saying is, you can give away sweets pretty easily, right?
Saying, I accept your gift, but I have no use for it. Please give it to another child.
Yeah, and again, this is going to depend on if you're dealing with a Dharma person or not. So if one of your Dharma friends gives you a gift, you can be very honest with them and say, I don't have any use for this. Please find another use for it. And you can speak to them in a more direct way than you maybe can with other people, right? So you have to recognize the circumstances you're in and do the best you can, right? As you lived a very privileged life where you're getting too many gifts. That's like, That's still a gift. That's people making generosity toward you, you know? I think it's just important when people give you gifts to remember why they're giving them to you and try to live up to it. So again, none of you have the vows of a monk or nun, but it may be someone giving you a gift out of devotion, whether it be a child or a family member who looks up to you, they respect you, they want to offer their thanks for things you've done in their life, for the person you are, right? They want to try to repay you for something. And so, even though that's not quite the same as like someone who's living in the vows and therefore is an object of merit, they're still giving it to you with the intention that they're trying to pay back your kindness. And so, therefore, try to receive it with that and then not squander in such a way that could cause harm to anyone, right? Whatever that may be. It's going to be different for different circumstances. Okay, sure. One more question.
Emotionally overwhelmed by certain situations or people. How do we balance?
We get emotionally overwhelmed by certain circumstances with people. Well, the immediate thing we have to do is we have to recognize what is causing those emotions, those reactionary emotions to come about. Are they the people, the conditions, or are they something that we expect from those people that is not being met in an appropriate way? So we have to say, why do I get this kind of emotional reaction when I'm around this person? Whether it be one of desire or attachment or envy or lust or anger, frustration, any of these things. Is that a result of that person or is it a result of me? Like find out what that trigger is, try to understand it. And so that is something you do after the fact, right? When you're going through your day, you say, wow, that experience was one that was filled with frustration. Where did that come from? Did that frustration really come from their actions or did it come from my expectations that weren't being met the way I wanted them to be, right? Or whatever it may be. So then when you do that analysis in your meditation work, then you can kind of see what are the seeds that cause those reactive or afflictive emotions to arise. And then when you can start becoming aware of the conditions that bring them about, which ultimately are going to go back to your self-cherishing mind, but there are other layers of conditions above that. Then when you actually are around those people or those situations, then you can try to notice those emotions before they arise or when they've arisen, but before you've acted on them, right? So the first step is to look at those emotions and recognize them for what they are. You know, that's the first step. To say, oh, I was acting out of desire or anger or frustration. So just being able to recognize it and name it and identify it. And then in your meditation practice, you say, where did that actually come from? You know, it wasn't from the outside. Those are just the conditions that have caused it to arise. It was my own mind. So what was it that caused this reactionary emotional response? So then you start seeing the causes, right? And when you start seeing the causes, then you can see how that emotional response was not benefiting you. It wasn't an appropriate response to the world. It was a worldly response, but it wasn't a response that actually would bring about happiness, and it wasn't a response that would actually bring about the end of suffering. All it would do is bring about more worldly happiness, which is not happiness, right? And that's the best it could do. So then you develop a conviction in that if you're meditating on it. And then the stronger you are, and the more you're able to do that, rather, then when you're in those experiences again, you try to be aware of those emotions. And that's also just like a worldly practice. If you know that every time I go see, every time I go hang out with this person, I end like leaving frustrated, then I'm aware of that before I go see them to try to be on guard to not let that negative emotion arise. And when it does arise, try to develop strategies. You say, okay, I know that usually when I'm around this person, I get really angry. So if I notice anger rising, this is what I'm going to do. This is going to be my game plan to help subdue that anger in the moment, right? So use both your like psychological and your worldly knowledge, combine it with your spiritual knowledge, and then use that as a way to go live in the world as wholesome as you can. And eventually, the goal is that your emotions, you recognize them, you're not denying them, but you're not allowing them to control your life. You're just recognizing them for what they are. And then you are allowing yourself to actually not be reactive, but instead be constructive in the way you engage about your relationships with others. Okay. I think we're going to end there because sorry, you guys, we went really late. I apologize. I appreciate you hanging out with me this long. Let's just take a moment to dedicate any merit we've created. Recognize that by spending time together today, studying the Dharma, studying our minds, studying these Lojong, these precious, precious Lojong teachings, we've accumulated some sense of karma, merit, some good karma, And instead of keeping that karma for ourselves, that merit for ourselves, we wish that that merit could ripen on all other sentient beings, that it could ripen into the freedom from suffering of all sentient beings. All those who are experiencing distress could be free from that distress. All those who have passed away will quickly experience perfect human rebirth and meet a Mahayana virtuous friend. And all those who are teaching may continue to teach the unexcelled Dharma in a way to benefit sentient beings, and that any good karma we've created today may benefit all sentient beings in that way. Especially may it ripen on our achieving perfect complete Buddhahood as quickly as possible so that we might benefit others. So in that way, we seal our virtuous activities this evening. We seal that good karma by putting it in the bank so we can't destroy it, by dedicating it away and giving it to others. And we will offer just these few verses of dedication that are on page 36 of our gold book. We'll offer these two verses in English. Then we'll repeat the second verse in Tibetan once. And then we will offer the short, long life prayer for His Holiness Dalai Lama. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings, without exception, into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow. May that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. Choe Sam Shorin Poche Ma Ke Panan Ke Gyorshe Jewa Nyam Pa Me Pa Yang Gone Gonde Pewa Sho. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All powerful Chen Rezig Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara ends. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for spending time with me this evening, for putting up with the loss of power and then coming back with power, all these things. I appreciate all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.